Going on, my people. So this is the first of many Seeking Excellence coaching calls that we're going to have. We're going to be live streaming these mostly on Locals every week on Tuesday afternoons. We'll be on Locals. Might switch to Tuesday mornings. We'll see. Just want to give it a few weeks here of trying this in the afternoon/evening time. It's obviously afternoon Mountain Time. I live in Denver, so I'm always a little bit behind all you East Coasters. But wanted to start kind of doing these on a regular basis because coaching is really something that I've wanted to be a part of Seeking Excellence. I've always thought of it as content, community, and coaching. Always the vision. Started obviously with the podcast, still doing the podcast weekly. Really excited about obviously having done that. We're closing it on 300 episodes in just over 3 years, which is really unbelievable to me. Pretty crazy to think about doing that much content, thinking about speaking that much into a microphone, something I never thought I would have ever really been able to accomplish. So really proud of that, but want to kind of take it into these next phases, right? Locals is really where we're starting to develop the community, and Locals is really the place where the way that I kind of view it is for people who are just kind of casually interested in my thoughts on random topics, interested on hearing different interviews with other people, right, that I bring onto the podcast. That's really what the Seeking Excellence podcast is for, and that's what it's about. Now, when it comes to the deeper stuff, when it comes to, my new kind of thought process or target audience for Seeking Excellence is Catholics, young Catholics who aspire to greatness, young Catholics who want more out of life, young Catholics who don't want to just keep their heads in the clouds and just, think about theology all day and not really get into the practicals of how God is calling us to change our lives, to be good stewards of our lives, of our time, of our resources, but rather, people who do want to do that, to people who want to take life by the horns, who want to get the fullness of life, to reach their fullest potential, right? All those kinds of things. And so that's really what this is all about. And so what Locals is going to be is the deeper dive into those things. So the coaching calls like this that I'm posting on Locals and will sometimes live stream to other destinations, the articles that I'm going to be posting every Friday, the videos that will go up on there, all that kind of stuff. Locals is the deeper dive of how do we actually live this stuff out. Sure, there's fun entertainment stuff, social media, reaction videos, and all that kind of stuff. But we don't want to just be consumers. We don't want to just be people who are entertained, people who are just outraged for the sake of outrage, etc. What we want is to be people who really want to practically implement things in our lives that help us to become our best. Practically implement things that are going to change who we are, develop healthy habits in our lives, and help us to become the man or the woman that God created us to be. And so that is kind of my vision of Seeking Excellence. And just to kind of give some context for these types of videos, for these live streams that I plan to do every week, at least every week that I'm able to do them live. That's what I want to do. That is the goal. That is the hope that I'll be able to, be able to share some things that will actually be able to be implemented into your daily life that can help you to become a better version of yourself. Because if Seeking Excellence is just entertainment or it's just fun or it's thought-provoking, that's not accomplishing what I wanted to accomplish. What I hope to do is to help thousands of people to implement and adopt this lifestyle of taking extreme ownership over every area of their life, recognizing what's possible and what's not possible with that, recognizing that we can't do everything, but we have to try to excel at the things that we choose to do, right? Not just putting, spreading ourselves thin and doing a bunch of different stuff, but actually being intentional about the things that we take on in our lives, being intentional about our professional life, how we manage our finances, how we manage our relationships, how we, are continuing to grow and develop ourselves mentally and physically and spiritually, etc. And so this is where we're going to be getting deep into that. And so I've always said I'd rather speak to a small audience about impactful things and just entertain a large audience. And so this is my attempt at doing that. Eventually, my plan is to release a Seeking Excellence or something similar. We'll see what ends up happening. I got some conversations, some things in the fire right now. We'll see what ends up coming of those. But I want to create a coaching program. That has always been the dream. That's always been the vision. That's always been the direction, that we want to be able to have a coaching program that I can meet with people one-on-one and take them through these 7 pillars of excellence, talk through being intentional, taking ownership, and having courage in each of those different areas of their life, provide some insight, some accountability, some inspiration to help them to take all of their life to the next level. I know for me, coaching programs, all that stuff, investing in myself has paid massive dividends. And so taking the time to actually pour resources, time into my personal development, into people who have been able to pour back into me and be able to help me has been hugely, hugely helpful. And so I want to be able to do that for other people. That's why I read so much, that's why I study all these different things, that's why I've been podcasting, is really refining my message, really getting to the point of what's most important. And so that's what is kind of the future. And that's kind of what I want to get into. And so if you have any feedback or thoughts on that, if that's something that excites you, then I'd love to hear from you. Shoot me a message on locals. And so to get into today's topic, if you've seen the title there, you've got Courage in an Age of Cancellation. And this is kind of a twist on the talk that I actually gave at YCP, at Young Catholic Professionals in Denver. And young Catholic professionals are largely my target audience because you usually have some pretty driven, motivated young people in the room whenever you meet at a YCP gathering. And so I love me some YCP. Sad for all of you out there. I know some people hit me up asking if I was going to be at the conference this year. We ended up having Jordan's birthday party the same weekend as the conference. I wasn't able to make it. But next year, mark my words, Seeking Excellence will be a sponsor. I'll tell you that. And so this is kind of a modification of my talk that I gave at the YCP chapter in Denver. And it's really all about how can we have courage in the workplace. So knowing that we have people who are getting canceled, people who are getting a lot of negative feedback. I hear people all the time. I've heard it at my job personally. I've heard it on social media a lot of times where people basically will thank me for saying the things that they're thinking, but they're not willing to say. They'll say, "Thanks, Nathan, for speaking about that. Thanks for putting that the way that you did. Thanks for speaking up in that company meeting," or whatever it might be. And I'm not totally against these people, right? I mean, I have a YouTube video that's coming out pretty soon where I address a similar situation where Sage Steele, if you don't know Sage Steele, she used to be the highest paid woman, the highest paid broadcaster at ESPN. She went on one of my favorite podcasts, which is the PBD podcast, Patrick Bet-David's podcast. And she was talking about her experience and her experience getting fired from ESPN because she has conservative values, she's Christian, etc. And so they let her go. And she shares a story about how when she was speaking up before she got let go, there was a lot of people, especially she was surprised by the men who would reach out to her and say, "Hey, thanks for saying that. I'd love to back you up, but I just can't. I just can't. I just can't." And she shares the story and she says, and it's understandable, she's like, "I get that. I understand why they're not willing to speak up. I understand why they can't do it. They have families to provide for, etc." And I just took issue with that. I think it's a very feminine take. I think the feminine genius is real. I think women tend to feel things very deeply. They tend to have a lot of empathy for other people. They tend to understand other people's situations and struggles and the difficulties that they're going through. I think part of the masculine genius is sometimes seeing through the BS and be able to cut through that and say, "Yeah, I can understand why you'd be feeling that way, but that doesn't justify your inaction," right? Your lack of action because you feel scared, because you feel the future is uncertain, because you like making $1 million or $500,000 a year, that doesn't actually justify cowardice. There's nothing really that justifies cowardice. There's no reason why you are convicted by the truth. You're convicted by what's right. You're convicted by what you should do, and you'd actively choose to do the opposite. And that anybody, especially a Christian with good morals, should say that that's okay. I understand. We shouldn't justify, we shouldn't defend cowardice, especially amongst men in our generation, right? That should be fighting for the truth. And the reason why I hit on that and that I think that's such a big deal is because when we justify cowardice in somebody else, we're eventually going to justify it in ourselves. Even if currently we're the hero and we're watching other people be the cowards and they're, acknowledging our courage and our heroic actions or words or whatever it might be, if I start to justify it for other people, like, yeah, I see other Catholic influencers and how when they got so big, they stopped speaking on cultural or political issues. Like, I understand that. I get that. Like, my following's not that big, but if I were them, I would understand. Well, what do I do if my following gets that big? Do I start to fold then? Do I start to say, okay, I'm in this situation now that's kind of similar to theirs, and I used to justify it for them. So now I'm allowed to be a coward as well. I'm allowed to choose money and my career and getting booked for events and all that stuff over what I think is right. No, I shouldn't do that. And I shouldn't allow other people's cowardice to influence my values to that extent. And that's one of the first things I want to hit on is that, You have to choose your values before they get tested. So I'm doing again my podcast episode next week will be a solo episode. The title is "Should a Practicing Catholic Go to a Same-Sex Wedding?" Should a practicing Catholic go to a gay wedding? And so you'll probably hear this story again if you listen to Monday's podcast episode. So I'm sure that I'll share it on there. I haven't recorded it yet. I plan to record it tomorrow. The question that everybody gets whenever you share authentic Christian teaching on something like same-sex attraction, on something like homosexuality or abortion or transgenderism, right? You always get this pushback from somebody if they're very anti your position, let's say. They'll ask you, well, what about, and this used to be asked to me before I had kids, now I have a son, but they'd ask you, well, what if your son ends up gay? What if your cousin comes out as gay and they invite you to be in their wedding or they invite you to attend their wedding? What are you going to do then? And it's usually posed as some big gotcha, right? It's supposed to be like, oh, now I got you in a trap. Now I really got you in this tricky situation. I bet you didn't think about what you'd do if it happened to you. And this is part of the problem that we have in society today. It's true that just like on our side, on the conservative side, we like to share those examples of stories of detransitioners, right? Where people who once were bought into the gender dysphoria and the gender madness of our current society, we like to highlight the people who have bought into that and then rejected it, bought into it and found it wanting, found it empty and desolate, and decided to try to detransition and go back to their original bodies, their original gender, their original selves, their original names and identity, etc. Similarly, there are a lot of stories on the other side where you have fallen away Catholics, former Christians, or people who still proclaim to be Christian but are not, who will say things like, yeah, I used to be a very Orthodox Catholic. I was raised in a strict Catholic home, and now when my son came out as gay, etc., and they'll give this testimony of how they abandoned their faith because of their current predicament, their current situation. You have to choose your values before they get tested. And there's no amount of emotional turmoil, there's no amount of human relationship destruction that should allow you to change your values. The truth doesn't change because of my son or daughter's sexual orientation. The truth doesn't change because of a family member or a friend's gender dysphoria. The truth doesn't change because a person that I know chooses to end the life of an innocent child at Planned Parenthood. That doesn't change the truth. And so this idea that your emotions would determine your values, your emotions and your situation being in a tough spot would dictate what you think is right and what you think is wrong, is a product of our culture. And it's a product of a relativistic culture, a culture that doesn't believe in universal truth. Part of what's inherent about universal truth is the idea that it applies in all situations, in all times, in all places. And if you don't have that, then you don't have any universal truth. And so if you want to reject universal truth, that's one thing, but don't sit here and tell me you believe in it until it gets difficult for you, right? Yeah, it's the same thing as like you believe that there should be martyrs, that sometimes it's worth dying for the faith, but then when you get the opportunity to die for the faith, you choose not to. And we forget that a lot of people suffer martyrdom, and what you might call a white martyrdom, right? So people who suffer immensely are rejected by society, by their family, by their friends, and die to themselves in some very real and tangible and painful ways without ever shedding blood, right? They lose their career, they lose all these different things in their life. Think of like a Job, right? Like a Job was a martyr in a sense. He was a white martyr where he didn't lose his life. He did bleed because he had the swords and all those kinds of things. But for his allegiance and his loyalty and his faithfulness to God, Job suffered immensely. And we don't like to read about stories like that. We prefer Philippians 4:13 or John 3:16, the nice readings that say that Jesus just came to help us. And we like to kind of think in our minds that we don't need to respond to that there's no cross for us. We ignore where Jesus says, pick up your cross and follow me. We just like the parts where it says God loves me. for who I am and everything I decide to do, and He just always forgives me, even if I'm not truly sorry, etc. And we have to reject this kind of watered down Christianity. If you listen to this week's podcast, the reel I just posted yesterday on Instagram, Isabel Brown talks about this extensively, about the fact that Gen Z is rejecting this watered down Christianity where we take out the hard parts. And so we do that a lot of times, and we want to act as though it's the right thing to do. But what you start to see is people who find themselves in these types of predicaments that end up abandoning their faith, end up abandoning the truth, is they trade the virtues and the values of Christianity for the virtues, quote unquote, and values of progressivism. And progressivism is essentially a religion, right? They have the same kind of outlook, process, morality of a religion. There's things you adhere to, there's things you do, there's things you don't do. It's a belief system. And they start this, this idea of inclusivity, of equity, of niceness, right? Of just constant empathy, of emotions over intelligence, um, of no universal truth, of nobody can tell anybody else that what they're doing is wrong or immoral. You start to see them trade the truth of the gospel. Jesus doesn't speak that way. They trade the truth of the gospel, the values of the gospel, for the values of the world. And they do so under the guise that they're trying to save a relationship. And in the short term, it might save the relationship, but it's not loving to sacrifice the truth for somebody else's feelings. Um, unless there's several things that you believe, such as you believe that truth doesn't exist, you believe that hell doesn't exist, maybe you even believe that God doesn't exist, or you believe that hell exists but nobody's there and everybody goes to heaven. If you believe those things, which are false, then it can make sense, and you might actually at least have um, valid logic, even though it's not sound, even though it's not actually correct. Your presuppositions are incorrect, which lead to bad outcomes and bad conclusions. But you at least would be operating based on those presuppositions. Your outcome your conclusions that you come to would be sensical, right? They would make sense in that regard. It's just that your basis is wrong, your foundation, your starting point is wrong. And so people will justify and do these mental gymnastics to defend themselves and to do these things that they know are wrong. And so I think, when it comes down to having courage in these times, we have to remember one of the great saints. And I talk about him all the time. And his name is St. Thomas More. I keep this photo of him, as you can see up here, over my shoulder. I keep this photo of him in my office all the time. And I love St. Thomas More. And I truly think that he's a man for our times. And I want to tell you a little bit about his life, because I think his life is pretty crazy. And yeah, it's just wild, the things that he went through and the ways that he suffered. But he was really, really awesome, man. And I think it's good to take some time to deep dive into the lives of saints here and there, because they have so much to teach us. And there's so much that they share that is applicable to our lives. Even though he lived some 500 years ago, the things that he went through and the example that he gave us is so applicable to today, in today's world, and the struggles that we have and the things that you and I are going through each and every day, especially living in our very anti-Catholic culture that we exist in today. And so he was born on February 7th, 1478 in London. So he's British, which might be the only point against him. He went to Catholic school, he studied at Oxford University. His father was a prominent attorney, and he became one as well. He was a full attorney at the age of 23. He was known to read devotedly from the Bible and the spiritual classics. And so he took his study of his faith very seriously. And what I love, especially as a Catholic convert, was he was a man of scripture. Sorry, I've been talking a lot today. I had a lot of meetings, so I got to get some water in me for my throat. All right. So he recognized, as he was going through his life, that his faith was very important, that it was central to who he was, central to him living a good life. And he was torn between going into civil service and this desire that he had to be a monk. He really wanted to be a Carthusian monk. And so he moved to a monastery that was outside London and practiced with the Carthusians. So at this point, he's basically like a lawyer by day and a monk by night. And so he's doing all these crazy penances and like suffering, fasting like crazy, wearing a hair shirt, all this stuff. Had a very, very devout prayer life. And he's known to have worn his hair shirt actually throughout his life, that he like never stopped that, which was an old, for those who don't know, was an old practice of Catholics who like really were committed to living a life of penance, a life of sacrifice. And so he did that, which I think was really beautiful and really awesome. Even though I don't really have much interest in wearing a hair shirt. Usually it was like camel's hair and it's just really uncomfortable. They basically would wear it underneath their clothes so people didn't know. And they would just live in this constant discomfort, which is just wild. And so he entered Parliament in 1504 and was later married to Jane Colt that year. He educated Jane and insisted his daughters receive the same education as his sons, which in the 1500s was very uncommon. So he was actually fairly progressive in that way, that he wanted his daughters to receive the same education that his sons got. He and Jane had 4 children together before she died in 1511. So they were only married for about 5 to 7 years in there. To give you some context on when St. Thomas More was alive, in 1517, 6 years after his wife passed away, Martin Luther posted his 95 Thesis on the church door in Germany. And so that's when the Protestant Reformation began in 1517 with Martin Luther. And so St. Thomas More, along with several other saints, are alive at this time. That this very, very tragic thing happened in church history where the Protestants split off from the one holy Catholic and Apostolic Church. And basically, instead of falling under the authority of the church and the Pope, decided to all become their own popes. And Martin Luther basically became the Pope himself. In 1520, Luther published 3 works on his new doctrine of salvation by grace alone. And so if you don't know, that's a huge part of the Protestant Reformation, is the belief that we are saved by faith through grace alone, by grace through faith alone. That there's no aspect of works that is included in justification. When my pastor, Father Brian, gets back from his sabbatical, I plan to record a podcast about him on that topic, because he quite literally changed my life the one night that he taught in RCIA about that very topic. All right, back to his life. So 1520, Luther publishes his 3 works on salvation. In 1521, King Henry VIII responded to Luther with More's assistance. So St. Thomas More helped King Henry VIII to write the Defense of the Seven Sacraments. Now, if you know anything about the story, this was quite the plot twist for me. I was pretty shocked when I heard about that because of what we're going to get to next. So King Henry was awarded the Defender of the Faith Award by Pope Leo X because of this work that he and St. Thomas More put together is what I was going to say, wrote together. He rose to the ranks. St. Thomas More rose to the ranks and became King Henry's secretary, confidant, and right-hand man. In 1523, he was elected the Speaker of the House of Commons. So you imagine being the Speaker of the House. He is that dude, essentially, right? Like the king needs to like address some theological issues, some pushback against Martin Luther. They're all Catholic at this point. And he calls on St. Thomas More. He becomes the king's right-hand man, his confidant, and he becomes the Speaker of the House, which is pretty insane. In the summer of 1527, this is when things really turn up. So King Henry VIII tried to use the Bible to prove to More that his marriage to Catherine of Aragon, his original wife, who had failed to produce a male heir. So he wanted to divorce Catherine of Aragon, his wife, King Henry did, because she had failed to produce him a male heir. And so he was very upset about this. And was hoping to get More to sign off on his plan to divorce her. And you can imagine this, right? Like somebody in your life comes to you. I'm sure you've had, this is basically the same thing we're talking about with attending the wedding or these other circumstances, or in the workplace or in your friendships, where somebody wants to do something that they know is wrong. And if you are the only or one of the only Catholic or spiritual influences in their life, then they want to get you to sign off on it. Right? I have this happen to me all the time. I say very frequently, it's not something that I can judge with 100% certainty, but it is a common theme in my life that when somebody who, especially that I grew up with or family member, friends from back in the day, when they are closer in their relationship with God, they tend to be closer to me. Not because I am like God or anything like that, but because of the fact that for many of the people that I was raised with, I am the only or one of the only people who are devoutly Christian. And by devoutly Christian, I don't mean to like toot my own horn, but somebody who strives to pray every day, strives to live a Christian life, goes to church every Sunday, etc. Like one of few people they know that do that, that are truly all in, especially a few Catholics that they know that do that. And so I've just had it happen so many times that when they start to abandon their faith and they no longer want to live that, I remind them of what they're doing. And so they tend to distance themselves from me. I've had cousins, friends, you name it, all throughout my life who have kind of come and gone, faded, and gotten back closer. And there just kinds of be this theme where it's like when they want to come back to their faith, they start to want to come around me more. And when they don't, they don't. So the similar situation is happening here. What St. Thomas More is that guy for King Henry VIII. He's the most devout Christian that he knows. And so he says, I want to do this thing. I'm kind of jumping through some mental gymnastics to get there. I want to show you in the Bible why I should be able to do this. St. Thomas More says, brother, you're married. He says, my brother in Christ, you are married. There's no way around it. The church has taught this for 1500 years, that it's binding and it's binding for life. So there's nothing I can do for you. So St. Thomas More says, yeah, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to sign off on it. He divorces her anyway and convinces the Archbishop of Canterbury, because this is what happens throughout church history, and a lot of people forget about this, and we have this today in the bishops of the church, the cardinals of the church, that the princes of the church often fold to political pressure, to power, whatever it is. We have some very saintly and holy priests, bishops, cardinals, popes. We have some very not saintly priests, bishops, cardinals, popes. The hard part for us is submitting to the authority of the church, even when they do not seem to be in line with what we want or what we believe is right. The Archbishop of Canterbury declares the marriage null and void, and the Church of England is established. And so basically, the Archbishop of Canterbury and King Henry VIII kind of agree, okay, like the Pope's not signing off on this, the church is against it, let's just kind of break off and do our own thing. And so St. Thomas More is able to remain loyal to the church. In 1532, he decides to resign from the House of Commons and cites poor health. Many believe that he just didn't want to be involved in this marriage scandal anymore. He didn't want to deal with it, so he just retired. At that point, More did not attend the subsequent coronation of Anne Boleyn in 1533, which is King Henry's new wife. So he goes out and marries this new woman, and St. Thomas More just chooses not to attend it. Interesting thing when it comes to the question of should we attend the wedding, which we'll get into more this Monday. In 1534, this is something else that's kind of happening same time elsewhere in the world. St. Ignatius of Loyola is also alive, and he founds the Jesuits. And part of the reason why he founded the Jesuits was to combat the spread of Protestantism in parts of Poland, Germany, and Hungary, to convert them back to Catholicism, which is pretty badass. And something we forget about the Jesuits is that they, for a very, very long time, were like the lifeblood of the church. I know today, when you think of the Jesuits, you think of Father James Martin, Father Greg Boyle of Homeboy Industries or Ministries, who just received the medal from President Biden, who was wearing a collar, thanks be to God, when he received the medal, because I don't think I've ever seen Father Greg Boyle in a collar, which is a way to do it. So in 1534, More is forced to sign the king's act of succession and the oath of supremacy, but refuses to accept him as the head of the Church of England. So basically, King Henry VIII is like, okay, it's time for everybody to like admit they're loyal to me, commit their allegiance, right? To pledge their allegiance to the Church of England and to me as the head of the church. So again, what happens in Protestantism is that everybody just decides to become their own pope when they reject the pope. And so King Henry VIII, being the leader of a country and now the leader of a church, was like, I'm the pope now. And so I think that the way it works now in the Anglican Church in England is that the house, like the parliament, is actually the head of the Church of England. Somebody was just recently informing me about this and basically saying that you have like Muslims who are in parliament who technically have a vote as the head of the Church of England. So how people stay in that perplexes me, to say the least. So St. Thomas More, obviously, he's an OG. Look at him. You can tell he's a stud. He's young thugging. And he's like, yeah, I'm not going to sign that. And so he was sent to the Tower of London and found guilty of treason in 1534. He was beheaded about 15 months later. We are very blessed to have some of his letters that he wrote to his family while he was in prison. I mentioned that his wife died. He got remarried to a woman who had a couple kids of her own, who was a widow, and um, that's just important. So something I'm going to share in a second. He's known for saying as his last words, "I am the king's good servant, but God's first," saying that I am a devoted son of England. I am loyal to my country. I am loyal to the king, but I am God's servant first. And so he was canonized 400 years later in 1935. Um, Beats the hell out of me how it took 400 years to canonize a martyr, but I don't know. The church moves really slow. So why does it matter that he got remarried? St. Thomas More, and why do I bring him up in this conversation of courage in the age of cancellation? We live in constant fear, whether it's because of getting Jamba juiced in your arm during a time where everybody's getting sick about 4 years ago, or if it's standing up for a pro-life cause while at work in your secular workplace, or it's not being willing to, or it's being unwilling to put your pronouns in your bio on LinkedIn, or it's being unwilling to share stuff in that great month of June when we have all the signs of Noah's flood and colorful flags flying around. Whether it's not attending a wedding of a friend or family member, you name it, whatever it is, our biggest fear is being canceled, which is receiving backlash from strangers on the internet, receiving backlash or negative comments from family members or friends. And I don't mean to diminish those things and act like they're not a big deal and act like they're not painful to experience, because they are. St. Thomas More faced being beheaded. That's when they cut your head off. He faced imprisonment. He faced public ridicule and shame. He faced many family, friends, and acquaintances and coworkers who just said, just sign it. This isn't even asking you to deny God. It's just asking you to say that this guy's marriage is valid. Who gives, like, it's not that big of a deal. It's not life or death. It's not that serious. And he refused to do it. And he refused to do it even though he had children. And he was the main provider for his children and for his wife. He did it even though his children had already lost their mother. He did it even though his stepchildren had already lost their father. His wife had already lost a husband. He did it even though he had been very successful and worked very hard to gain a great reputation and great career in the British Parliament. St. Thomas More had everything that we have as excuses, tenfold, and still refused to cave on the subject of marriage. He refused to give in. He refused to say, this isn't that big of a deal, this marriage thing. The indissolubility of marriage is not that serious that I should lose my life for it, or that the church should die on this hill, or that we should lose other people or offend other people to stay true to the faith and what the church has taught about the sacrament of matrimony. St. Thomas More didn't do that. St. Thomas More realized that marriage is the bedrock of society, that families are the foundation of a strong society, and that if the king or anybody else decided to try to usurp God's authority when it comes to the church, when it comes to the faith, when it comes to the sacrament of holy matrimony, he was not okay with it. And he was willing to die to stay true to the faith, to stay true to God, to stay true to Scripture, to stay true to the church. And so I just encourage you today, we have to think about that. We have to think about these saints who died for the faith that we get to practice, the faith that we so often take for granted now. Many people died so that we could have what we have. So how do we have courage in the age of cancellation? One, we have to put ourselves in the context of history. There are people who died to hide the Jews during the Holocaust, people who died to end a fight against the evil of World War II, and the fight to end the evil of slavery and the Civil War, and many other times throughout history. And so do you want to be remembered as a hero? Do you want to be remembered as a coward? We have to stop justifying cowardice in other people, because if we do that, then we're going to just justify it in ourselves. I doubt St. Thomas More went around condemning everybody who caved and signed, but I also doubt that he went around justifying and defending and saying, it's okay, I understand why they did that. It's all right that they did that. He didn't justify cowardice because he wasn't a coward himself. And he had probably his only fear was the fear of becoming a coward and not staying true to the church and not staying radically devoted to the God who created the universe, to Jesus Christ and his church that he established here on earth, which is the Catholic Church. All right. God bless you. Thanks for tuning in today, guys. This is our first live stream, so I'm gonna check it out after this. I don't know if you have comments or anything. If there was any issues, please feel free to leave a comment so that I know, because this is the first time trying this through Rumble Studio. So we went live today on Rumble, on Locals, and on YouTube. Again, if you like this type of content, I encourage you to subscribe to the YouTube channel. Weekly, we'll have different YouTube videos that'll be about 10 to 15 minutes long. We have a podcast coming out on Apple and Spotify every Monday, Seeking Excellence with Nathan Crankfield. And then we have our Locals channel where we'll do live streams like this weekly. We'll also have weekly articles and other content on there that I share to help you become the best version of yourself. This is the number one podcast that you need to listen to if you're a young Catholic who aspires to greatness. And so I'm happy to be on this journey with you. We're going to make a big impact in the world. And may God bless you. And I hope you go out there and be your best. We'll see you next time.